if I'm gonna. There we go. Welcome again. It is so great to see you all here. Susan, would you like to sort of talk about Heartwell first? This is, I know it's typically like a lot of people are the typical Trauma Training Tuesday audience, and here we are on Monday. What? Um, because this is a partnership with Heartwell Institute, and we have with us the beautiful, talented, amazing executive director of the Heartwell Institute, my good friend Susan Buckles. Woo!
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm not yet used to hearing me introduced that way. I am very new to the Heartwell Institute, and I know that many people may not be familiar with the Heartwell Institute, but we are a mindfulness center and retreat center in Worcester. And our goal is to democratize mindfulness, make it available to everyone, and to break down barriers to mindfulness. We have a special desire and a special focus on populations that have been historically marginalized. So BIPOC populations, people in the LGBTQI space, but we are here for everyone, and we also offer mindfulness training. We really care about our healthcare workers and our people. I'm guessing most of the people on this call are people that are helping others and may need some help themselves from day to day. And so we want to be that space where we can provide good, strong mindfulness skills to keep our mental health healthy. So I'm going to put a link to the Heartwell Center Institute in the chat. And then another time, perhaps we can feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I look forward to sharing more information at another date.
Thank you, Susan.
Sure.
Susan and Kelsey are both going to be on deck to help me because once I put my slideshow up, that's all I can see. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I think Susan said that if questions come up and you want to put them in the chat, you can do that and she'll jump in and read them to me or let me know. Or we can also go to the end. I think I have a slide or two where I might, kind of stop and be more conversational because this is something that is, when we talk about it, it's doing the healing right there. All right, so here I go. I'm gonna, from beginning, intergenerational trauma. And intergenerational trauma and generational trauma are used somewhat interchangeably. Generational trauma might be more about experiences of a whole group of people. Intergenerational speaks more to the way that it gets transmitted across generations and across people. So generational trauma is a cycle of trauma that passes through families. My name is Amy Ebbison. I am a licensed clinical social worker working as Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I did want to say that this is a really new field, essentially. Not that intergenerational trauma is new, but because of our new access to DNA information, our new way of understanding our brains, how things get passed down, it's opened so many doors to our understanding about what's going on for people. I think one of the first big studies about intergenerational trauma is 2015. So again, less than 10 years old, this sort of whole field is. And a lot of the work on intergenerational trauma has specifically come out of Australia and really looking at the Aboriginal people that were already there, indigenous to the land, and the impact that colonization had, intentionally ripping families apart, intentionally taking away the pieces of culture that kept us moving forward and kept us together. I found this picture and I thought it was such a good representation of the sort of concept of generational trauma. If you haven't, probably everybody's seen the matryoshka dolls, they're called, and or nesting dolls. And in each doll is a smaller doll. And in this picture, you can see this biggest one here. If that's a patriarch of a family and there's a stab through it, it is going to very much hurt this individual, but all of those individuals nested within and impacted are also going to be feeling the impact of that traumatic exposure. So just the recognition that we don't exist as islands onto ourselves. When things affect us, it's going to affect the people around us. Meaning that a lot of our traumatic content isn't actually our content. So the hope, and we only have, an hour and a half, and that's probably plenty for this topic because it can be really heavy and intense. And because of that, self-care is super important. And what we mean by that is absolutely whatever you need to be able to listen, to take care of yourself, is totally fine by me. My feelings would not be hurt if you leave, if you go off camera. I want this is for you. So whatever works for you is fine, is beautiful. You can get up, get a drink, anything that helps you sort of be in the space and feel safe is great. The hope for today is to recognize that our personal experiences are incomplete. We are part of a much larger picture. And the hope is that understanding a little bit more about what we may have inherited will help us make sense of things better. I'll share it at the end, but I have a giant playlist of things that I've gathered about generational trauma. And one of the leaders in this field said, this can make you feel really helpless, but also when you do understand more about what's going on, people usually felt better and empowered, and it made more sense. So that's the hope here, is not to make you feel like, oh, this already happened, you've already got this burden. The hope is recognizing that is going to be helpful. And this little picture here is there to remind me and us that this learning is both intellectual, meaning it's in our brains, it's knowledge, but it's also emotional content. As a trauma therapist, I learned a lot in school and from helping people and walking alongside of them. But I learned very different things and very important things from experiencing trauma myself. So just want to put out there that there's lots of different ways of knowing and learning about this work. Whenever we talk about anything in the realm of mental health, the idea of stigma is really important and prevalent. It really colors everything we do. And the definition of stigma is a mark of disgrace or infamy, a stain or reproach as on one's reputation. We know that anything in the realm of mental illness, just talking about it can bring judgment to you. Our culture really doesn't do the best job of handling and thinking about mental illness and mental health. And we're all subject to that. And that's painful and powerful. It's a big force. Stigma is a barrier that discourages people from getting help. We kind of internalize stigma and feel like there's something wrong with us if we need help. And we don't get help, even though there is healthy, effective help out there. The fear of judgment and what that means keeps us from getting it. We live in this sort of individual paradigm where we think everything is about the individual and not the larger picture. And so if you're experiencing distress and mental illness, usually we put that on you. We blame you for that. We blame you. We think you caused your own illness and you're causing family shame to even talk about it. So because of this, we can see that stigma is playing out at the individual level, at the family level, larger groups, systems, our entire culture is playing this out. The amount of stigma that you're going to experience is going to depend on your unique positionality, meaning your age, your race, your culture, your education, all of that. It's intersectional. Different groups experience stigma differently and may experience more or less stigma as a member of that group. In many areas of social life, we know that men typically have more power than women. In the realm of mental health, men experience more stigma than women. It's harder for men to seek help. And I think that, that is about sexism and that we kind of made it, we've feminized emotions and having emotions. So if you have any struggle emotionally, you're going to sort of be subject to what that means, that sort of sexism, the feminization of it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Stigma and this whole idea about mental illness is a major contributor to generational trauma. I love this cartoon and I show it all the time. I like to trot it out because to me, it makes it so very clear how different we think about physical illness and mental illness. You can see this is the exact same picture, the top frame and the bottom frame. And the top frame is labeled physical illness. And we have this guy lying out there. I feel like I'm dying. And his helper says, we need to get you to the hospital as soon as possible. In the bottom picture, it is the exact same picture. The guy is lying there. I feel like I'm dying. But this one is labeled mental illness. And the helper says, just try and remember, a lot of people have it a lot worse. I'm sure many of us have heard that messaging even, right? We would never blame somebody, shame them for seeking help for physical illness. Yet we do all the time with mental illness. And that's such a big part of the problem here today. I want to talk a little bit about Worcester addresses childhood trauma and how sort of our origin story and how this is about generational trauma. Worcester addresses childhood trauma based in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I know many of you are from Worcester, but not everyone is. In 2013 to 2015, similar to what we're experiencing now, Worcester had a lot of problems with gang violence. So much so that we got a grant from a national organization to look at what are the drivers of this violence in Worcester. So we used that to do a lot of focus groups and to really understand what was going on here. And the focus groups were with these Safe and Successful Youth Initiative participants. These were young men that were labeled as proven risk, meaning we knew they were already kind of getting in trouble. And so that's where we really drilled down to find out what was going on. From there, we created the Worcester Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. But the assessment identified that what was driving youth violence was family stress, unemployment, early childhood trauma, generational cycles of gang involvement, limited neighborhood recreation, and punitive school discipline. What we saw was these young adult men that we were looking at had police in their homes before they could walk and talk in many cases. 30% of them had very early police contact before age 12 as a victim of a crime or a witness to a crime. Also, police were coming to their homes because their parents were getting in trouble. Their parents were already involved in criminal activity or gang work. This police contact became increasingly violent over the years and over their lifetime. These young men were struggling in school with learning problems and behavior challenges. The majority of them have struggles with their mental health and or substance issues. And a third of them, and this is sort of, 18 to 24-year-old range, have one or more children already. So what this showed us was that this is not a problem that we can take in isolation. We can't just try to help kids without understanding the context they're in, and that their parents, the adults in their lives, are struggling as well. So we really landed on, if you want to intervene, you have to intervene at both generations, with parents and with children. This also showed us this idea that I've talked about a lot, is that whatever we grow up with, whatever is going on around us, is what is normal. And that is a really powerful concept and a powerful idea. The DSM, which is what social workers and psychologists use, it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of all things mental illness, that uses this phrase within normal range in almost every single illness criteria. And so that leaves us wondering, well, what do we even mean by that? What is normal? And turns out there's really no such thing. Gabor Mate recently wrote a book called The Myth of Normal. And that's speaking to this idea that there's not a normal. Every single one of us has different personal, social, cultural expectations and experience. Whatever happened in your family is what's normal for you. So if it's normal in your family to be fearful of police, that's what you're going to teach your children. That's what's going to keep being passed down. We don't even really know that other people are having different experiences than us until we're a little bit older, until we go to other people's houses, stay with other friends, learn this from the media and comparing other sort of groups. So given that, there's like 6 million different types of normal. There's not one thing. I'm not going to read this because I'm already taking more time than I want to take, but the gist of it is like, whatever is happening to you is what you're learning as a life lesson. It's setting the stage for your life. So what is going on here? Why is this a thing? And so one of the things that comes up, we have this myth in our culture that we're born blank slates. That's what the term tabula rasa means. This idea that we're all coming on board here in this life with nothing, that we're just all, and that we're all starting somehow in the same place. We know that that is not the truth. A friend of mine and Susan Milletz wrote a book called Behind from the Start. And to me, the title of that book really says it all. We're not coming into this life at the same place. Many people are already starting with several strikes against them. But yet our culture persists with this idea that we all start in the same place and that we get ahead according to our merit. The myth of the meritocracy, this idea that everybody can kind of stand on their own 2 feet, on their own merit. And if you're up front, if you've done well, it's because you deserve it. You deserve to be there. You worked to get there. Yet we know that that is absolutely not the truth. I remember, I'm older than a lot of you, but I remember in the sort of the Bush years, George W. Bush had talked about being a self-made man. And I'm thinking like, I don't know, growing up in the White House could have been an advantage for you, right? So we don't even really challenge some of these myths that people have worked so hard, that people have worked hard to get where they are, but there's also an impact on accumulated advantages. If you're growing up in the White House, that's an advantage. On the other side of that is accumulated disadvantage, things like generational poverty. This myth of the meritocracy, tabula rasa, all of this gets into this idea of invisibility. We sort of don't talk about it and act like we don't see that people have different things afforded to them. We're all having different experiences, and some of those experiences are much more personally enriching than others. But we turn a blind eye to it and pretend it's not happening. All of this is about trauma. If you're asking me, it's a trauma response. Trauma, according again to our friend the DSM, is an occurrence that would be notably distressing to almost anyone. And the definition is as simple as that. Something bad that happens to you that's harmful, that puts you in fight, flight, freeze. Also, according to the DSM, you can directly experience it yourself or witnessing it occurring to somebody else. So seeing it happen, or even learning about something that happened to a loved one in the past classifies it as a trauma. So this means that this intergenerational trauma, hearing about things from past generations, can absolutely set you up for a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, legitimately. We don't have intergenerational trauma as its own thing in the DSM, but because the definition includes things that have happened in the past, you can have PTSD from things you didn't experience firsthand. Trauma is a predictable response to something extraordinarily stressful. It impacts all areas of your life and significantly affects your functioning and the quality of your relationships. That's where this shows up in how you interact with other people. And I have this picture of the record here because I think even young people today who didn't grow up with vinyl records because of rap know about the skip in a record. And the skip in a record to me is the exact best way to understand sort of how we get stuck with trauma. You know that if you had your Prince album on and you were listening to We're Gonna Party Like It's 1999, if that skip was there, I'd be hearing that phrase on repeat, right? On repeat, just it's going to be stuck in that skip. When I know there's a skip in the record, I know that even when I'm getting close to where that part is going to come in, it's going to fall in that hole unless I pick up the needle and move it way around. That's avoidance, right? So when we have trauma, we are either stuck, we fall in the hole, it's all we can think about is the trauma, the bad thing, or we're on the other side on constant alert for anything that's getting us close to that trauma content, and we're ready to move, ready to avoid it. We're going to go far away from it because we don't want to get triggered. So it's one extreme or the other, and all of the symptoms relate to the trauma. In trauma, one of the biggest pieces of this is this idea of the repetition compulsion, the idea that this content is on repeat for us. And I remember before I had sort of my own trauma, teaching about and thinking about this idea of a repetition compulsion, like I didn't really get it. I was like, I don't know, I guess people, just the devil, they see these patterns and here they are repeating it. Recognizing it in my own life is when I realized that I was repeating cycles because I was confusing safe and familiar. If you didn't grow up in safety or in health, in a healthy environment, you're going to seek what you sort of know how to deal with, know how to cope with. And if that was unhealthy, that's going to keep you in that cycle, the confusion of safe and familiar. This stuff is nature and nurture. Both things are true. Many of us here today recognize the huge impact that our genetic experiences, our genetic material has on our life and our life experience, as well as what's going on around us, what happened in our families. One, for me, one of the most, actually, I'm going to start a little sooner. There was what we called the Dutch hunger winter. There was starvation happening and people did not have enough to eat. And women that were pregnant during that time transmitted that onto their unborn children. We learned from that even before you're born, experiences are impacting you. And so kids of the Dutch hunger winter had 60% more than other peer groups, mental health distress, anxiety, depression, all of the stuff. Even though things were okay after they were born, things got better, that experience in utero impacted the rest of their life. Another very studied group of people is children of Holocaust survivors. And we learned that children of Holocaust survivors who didn't experience them themselves still had anxiety and depression at much higher rates than their peer group. So it was more evidence that this generational stuff is moving down, impacting people, impacting children. There's a whole body of research and evidence about post-traumatic slavery syndrome. This idea of enslaved people in our country and our culture had to learn different ways of coping, had to do different things to sort of survive that experience. And many of those things were passed down to their children. The most mind-blowing one to me is this one that I have at the top of the slide. It was a study using mice, as they often do. And what they did was they took a generation of mice and they paired electroshocks on their feet with a smell, a sweet smell, like an acetone smell. And so they induced trauma in this generation of mice. And so every time the mice had this smell, they got the shock. And they really quickly associated the smell with the shock. What happened next was the children of those mice got that smell and responded. They responded to that smell, even though they themselves had never been shocked. They responded as if they had. Mind-blowing. Not only did it happen in the children's generation, it happened in the grandchildren generation. So this generation of mouse pups that never even interacted with the original mice that had that trauma still felt the effects of it. If that is happening with mice, and here we can imagine that traumatic content that our parents, our grandparents experienced is passed down to us, whether we know it or not, whether they talked about it or not, whether we even met them or not. All of this trauma can be interfere with attachment, interfere with, because trauma impacts us relationally, it's going to impact the way we parent, the way we are nurtured or not nurtured. It's also, I also like to talk a little bit about memory and how trauma impacts memory, because trauma impacts memory in really important and kind of messed up ways. Many of us here probably remember September 11th, 2001 super clearly. I know I do. I can remember that whole entire day from when I woke up to who I talked to. I can't really remember September 10th. I can make guesses about what was going on that day because I have the context of the next day, but it's all kind of a blur. When we have healthy memories, they get glossed over time. We remember things as better than they actually were. Another thing that I like to say is when you're sort of going into high school and everybody is like, oh, high school, it's the best years of your life. It's going to be so great. Yeah, no high schoolers are telling you that. Only old people are telling you that. And that is because if you weren't traumatized, things get remembered as better than they actually were. But trauma, it never really gets filed, essentially. It's almost always ever present. Even if much time has passed, traumatic memories remain vivid. When you've had trauma before, you could sort of walk and talk and think in sentences and words. It gets filed in very sensory ways, meaning sight, sound, smells, and it can be really kind of hard to get your head around it. It can cause a lot of unexplainable physical and emotional reactions. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and just the title really says what he's saying in this book, is that we encode this stuff and recognize it, even if it's not conscious. So sight, sound, smells cause this re-experiencing of something traumatic. One of the other pieces of this is when some of these historical trauma experiences had our ancestors like in survival mode, just doing whatever they needed to do to get through that, to survive that. They weren't stopping to process, make sense of, feel the feelings. They were just going. They had no choice, right? Like this picture here with the dishes in the sink. You can do that. You can just be like, you know what? I can't cope with this right now. Boom, I'm saving that for later. But the problem is, you have to come to it later. It gets stinkier and smellier and more intrusive when you don't deal with that. And a lot of this sort of generational trauma is our parents, our grandparents piling up this stuff in the sink and never getting around to sorting it through, making sense of it, leaving that big mess for the next generation right there. The past is never dead. It's not even past. William Faulkner. Racism is another place where we can really see generational trauma and how it gets passed down and passed down. Racism is a social determinant of health, mental health, and well-being that has a profound impact on children, adolescents, adults, and their families. Exposure to racism as a target, a witness, or an unwilling participant is trauma, meaning this system, this structure is traumatic for all of us. Much more traumatic if you're the victim of racism, but traumatic for all of us. The response is the same as the trauma response. We're fight, flight, freeze. Our stress hormones are released. We have all kinds of inflammation. We have body physical responses that lead to shorter life expectancy. It creates a moral injury. It's a trauma, and like other traumas, there's a dose response, meaning the more you're subject to it, the more impactful it's going to be. I got this picture of the fish in the fishbowl because one of the things that's so clear about racism is it's the water we're swimming in. We cannot really separate ourselves from it because we're in it. It's what it is. We know that a trauma like racism is multi-level. It's expressed personally, right? It looks like private beliefs, prejudices, ideas that individuals have. And so often our culture focuses on the personal impacts of trauma. But we know it's bigger than that. It's also interpersonal. It shows up in the space between individuals, in more than just individual experience, what's happening between people. And people make up the institutions we have, meaning the schools, meaning our political system, meaning our healthcare system. Institutionally, this looks like discriminatory treatment, policies and practices within organizations and institutions that advantage one group over another. All of these institutions coming together, bigger than this, become the structural racism. Systems in which public policies, institutional practices, and other norms perpetuate racial group inequality. So with racism, it's really easy to see you don't just get to start with no racism. You're coming into a culture that already has this at multiple levels impacting. We talked sort of about this idea of a family and family systems and what happens in a family. And by the way, this chart here is the social determinants of health. I use that phrasing without necessarily defining it. And I know a lot of you, this is not new information. You know what this all means. But the social determinants of health are all of these pieces that impact our life experience, our neighborhood, our society, who's in our social support. Are we being discriminated against? Do we have other people? Do we have adequate housing? Can we get food we want to eat? What is happening for us in stress, religious, spiritual experiences? Is the language we speak valued and valuable? All of these things are going to determine our life experience. Because families are the primary influence in our life, it's really important to think about what happened in our family. And we have, I didn't reference Murray Bowen, but this is his theory, the idea of family systems theory. And it's called a system because every piece influences every other piece. History tends to repeat itself in families, and families move through time horizontally and vertically. So things are happening within one generation, coming down from the previous generation, being passed down to the next generation. So it's not, there's no one sort of point. It continues. Each individual member must maintain separateness from and connectedness to the family. This is sort of our work as individuals. Systems develop typical ways of being that are reliable and predictable, and every part of the system affects each other. In family systems theory, the biggest guiding principle is that families are seeking homeostasis or equilibrium, meaning they are seeking to have things stay exactly as they are. There is a pull from the system not to change, but to continue functioning as things have always been. The tendency to keep doing things as they've always been is known as homeostasis, or the system's equilibrium. And I have this picture of a mobile here. Because you know how kind of how a mobile works, you can pull on one part of it and it will sort of cause destabilization. It'll flop around, but it'll eventually reset back to where it was. And we see that when kind of people kind of try to redo what's happened in their family or think about it differently. That pull dysregulates the system, but the system really wants to go back to the way it was. So I know people here have kind of experienced this. You might be saying to your family, this isn't healthy, this isn't right, this isn't how it should be. And you cause all this grief, you cause things to destabilize, but everyone tries to sort of, whether they realize it or not, pull it back to the way it was. Sort of, why are you still talking about that? Can't we just move on? Like this pull to just keep on being the same. One of the ways we see generational trauma really show up is with addiction. Addiction can really be understood as self-medication, as a way to cope with trauma that has happened. I love that this is another one of my things that I'm always trotting out, this cartoon, because I think it's so telling. It makes so much sense. If you are the person in distress experiencing symptoms of trauma and you say, I can't handle this anymore, I need help, I need relief, we will probably say to you, go see a therapist. And she will probably say to you, give me 2 or 3 months in therapy and you'll start to feel better. And you're like, 2 or 3 months, come on, I can't wait that long. I need more immediate help. And so she will send you to the psychiatrist. And I know these are gendered and but this is really kind of usually how it goes. And the psychiatrist will spend 10 minutes with you and will break out the prescription pad and will say, here, give this medication 2 or 3 weeks and you're going to start to feel better. Okay, great. Better than 2 or 3 months, but still, I want to feel better now. You go to the bar on the corner and the bartender says, give this shot 2 or 3 minutes and you will be feeling better. Makes a lot of sense to me why people might use alcohol to self-medicate. If you do have alcoholism in your family, if you have a parent or caretaker that is an alcoholic, I'm pretty confident that you yourself either are what we might call a teetotaler, meaning you stay away from alcohol at all costs, you don't go near it, or you're struggling yourself with it. When you have addiction in your family, that's what trauma is. That's what generational trauma is. You do not get to have a freely chosen relationship with alcohol. You are either walking in those footsteps, falling in that hole, or working so hard to not fall in the hole that that defines your relationship with alcohol or addiction. Heavy, hard, challenging. So what do we do? What helps? What can we do with this? Well, first off, self-care, of course, and not just buzzwordy self-care, not just doing your nails and taking a bath, but really genuinely looking at your needs in many different areas, your emotional needs, your physical health needs, your environmental needs, and attending to those the best you can. Self-care is a priority and a necessity, not a luxury in the work we do, in the lives we live. I have this Thich Nhat Hanh quote here because I think it's a good one to remember. When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself and his suffering is spilling over. He does not need punishment. He needs help. This sort of hurt people idea that for many of us, we have inherited trauma from our parents, from the pain that they've gone through that has been put onto us. And it's hard to get out of that, and because we're suffering, but the recognition that this is their suffering manifesting at least has helped me. Healing, and Susan introduced us, and here we are at Heartwell. Healing happens best collectively, together. This whole idea that we're one person, this individual model of everything, isn't serving us. It isn't what's needed for this situation. This isn't about healing as just one person. We want to do this work together. That's what's really going to make a difference. And many of us have found we can't heal we can do some stuff by ourselves, but doing this work together is so important, impactful, meaningful. It reduces stress. And anything we do in the interest of reducing our stress is good for undoing the harms of trauma. So whatever that looks like, if that's reducing job stress by being able to hand things off, any ways that you reduce stress in your life are going to benefit you and benefit people around you. We know that mindfulness, and what we mean by mindfulness, and we can talk more about it on the other side, is really being in the here and now, living in the present, in this moment. I know for me, when I've experienced a lot of trauma and anxiety, it feels like it's closing in on me. It feels ever present. It feels dangerous and scary. And I really had to develop a mantra of self-talk of nothing bad is happening right now. Nothing bad is happening right now. So that sort of coming back to the present of, okay, all this stuff is really painful, overwhelming, horrifying, scary, but right now I'm sitting in my house, and my dog's here, and I'm warm and I'm safe, and I've got a roof over my head. So it feels horrifying, but in this moment, I'm okay. And being able to give people access to mindfulness in a way that maybe they haven't before, in a way that really fits into their life, is part of why I want to partner with Heartwell. It's exciting. It's important. Sleep, to me, is another one of the most under-recognized, underutilized medicines out there. In every single sort of mental illness you can experience, the first things to go are your eating and your sleeping. You're either going to eat more or less than normal, sleep more or less than normal. So right out of the gate, if your eating and your sleeping are thrown off and dysregulated, good luck. What else are you going to do? I know we as adults think that it's not so important for us, but you see it in little kids. You can see that toddler like, wow, they really need a nap because they are crying, they are tantruming, they are melting down. And then a few minutes later, they fall asleep. We're not so different. If we're not getting enough sleep or restful sleep, everything is going to be hard. EMDR is also, and I know some people here today have tried EMDR and had experience with EMDR, and it is an evidence-based practice. It's really working for people. It is about using your eye movements paired with trauma content to sort of build new connections and undo the power that traumatic content has. I have not tried EMDR, nor am I an EMDR practitioner. I've only read about it. So maybe some on the other side, people can talk about it if they've gotten benefit from it. I know lots and lots of people have gotten benefit from it. The other promising practice is psychedelic medicine. The sort of all of the people in the realm of trauma are now in the realm of psychedelic medicine. And personally, I am just finishing up a program in the use of psychedelics in addressing trauma. Psychedelic medicine has had better effects than almost anything else. So we are hoping that social change will catch up and that these will be tools that we can use legally, safely, and effectively to work with this traumatic content. One of the things that is often said about healing from trauma is this idea that you have to feel it to heal it. Like that dirty dishes slide, if we just keep pushing it and I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to be there, I'm not going to do that, that is going to keep it in place. When we stop and we look and we feel and reflect, that's what's going to move us forward. But also, we want to do that at the right time and with the right dose, meaning all at once. If we really think about it, it's gonna be overwhelming. It's gonna be paralyzing. So we want to try to do this in smaller doses, like give yourself a certain amount of time to think about it, to feel about it, to reflect on it, and then move on and sort of move to something else, come back to it later. That's this sort of idea of flooding and too much at once is hard. That's not the way to do it. So finding that space where you're kind of the right amount of it. Awareness is really the biggest and the first thing. Recognizing what's going on and how this came to be and what is your trauma and what isn't your trauma is going to help so much. Just recognizing what has happened before or what has been passed down to you. Whatever we put attention on, we give our power to. Paying attention is one of the best things we can do, and it's completely free. And then education, learning, trying to learn more and more about what has happened, what we can do about it. Those pieces really, really help us have the insight. And what we mean by insight is the ability to look in at what we're seeing, evaluate what we have here. In the whole realm of mental health, insight is the best predictor of success. Every single mental illness, if you see what's happening, if you learn your own triggers, if you understand why, those are the people that do better and better. So sort of keeping on learning, keeping understanding, those are the things that are really going to help. You can take your own sort of family tree and start, if you don't know what kinds of things you may have inherited, this is a good exercise in trying to unpack that, trying to recognize this. Social workers often use these genograms, all kinds of therapists do. I found this one online, it's a Harry Potter one. So they have Harry in the middle, and then they're looking at all of these relationships, not even just family relationships, but also friendships, things in the sort of larger context. And looking at these relationships is a way to see what are some of these patterns that repeat. What are some of the things that I learned from the ways my parents interacted or didn't interact that I'm now doing in my family? Again, that idea that whatever we saw is what's normal for us. So if we grew up in a family where there might have been domestic violence, where there were one parent that was abusive, aggressive, and another parent that just withdrew and sort of shut down or didn't deal with it. That's what we saw in front of us. That's what we learned to do. So it makes a lot of sense that we would do the exact same thing. We would confuse safe and familiar. We would, here we go. Or we would do exactly how our parents did it, or trauma response, the exact opposite. And either way, we're now creating the pendulum effect that generational trauma can have. So sort of going and kind of trying to create your own family tree, you can find templates and guidelines all over the internet. Looking back at least to grandparents and whatever you know about those people and what they experienced is going to help you identify some of the things. Just asking for stories and finding out this stuff is really helpful in making sense of what may be going on for you. Looking for any striking events, looking at how relationships were organized, illnesses, addictions, alternative lifestyles, all kinds of stuff like that is going to impact and is going to impact you and your children and how you interact with people around you, how you build culture. Self-care and self-compassion. When we're doing our work, that is healing the generational trauma. I know many people here are my friends and they're engaged in this mental health work with me. We're kind of doing our healing together. And we know that it's hard, it's painful, but we also see the benefits of it. We also feel less alone. We feel more connected. These are the things that are going to ripple out and have generational impact in a positive way. This idea of generous assumptions is a Brene Brownism. And if you haven't heard of Brene, she is like the most famous social worker. And for her, the generous assumption is that assume that we are all doing the best that we can. That when you see people around you and their behavior doesn't make sense to you, or it doesn't seem productive, or it's not what you do, stopping to think about how did they learn that? Maybe that was their normal. Maybe that's all they knew, and really genuinely believing that they're doing the best they can. And that goes for you too. We are all doing the best we can. We're taking sort of what we learned and what was handed down to us and trying to make sense of it and trying to do right by ourselves. I'll share it again, but this is a playlist on all kinds of content about generational trauma. It has the stuff about the mouse study and the Dutch hunger winter and all of those pieces in much greater detail than I've given it today. I also put this little graphic, it's not really a graphic, but about glimmers. And the idea of a glimmer is that a glimmer is the opposite of a trigger. We know that with triggers, we're kind of working to not find the thing that sucks us into the bad content. A trigger is the sight, the smell, the phrase that reminds you of the bad thing and causes you to feel like you're re-experiencing it. A glimmer is the opposite. It's finding the tiny moment of something good that makes you feel great, that makes you feel happy, and trying to really milk that for all it is. This sort of build from that, a tiny moment of awe, like maybe just the way the sunlight comes in or hits something and makes a little rainbow, sparking joy and evoking inner calm. Intentionally finding these glimmers can have a positive effect on our mental health. Micro moments trying to shift our mood into a more positive place. And same as the trigger does, it's on the other side, cues of safety and regulation to our nervous system, kind of calming us down, bringing ease and contentment. Our body responds to the positive energy and can allow us to feel hopeful when we feel overwhelmed and lost. Just finding one little thing, petting your dog, seeing your cat, strengthens our nervous system. And that helps increase our well-being. Once we start doing this, again, what we put our attention on grows. So when we're looking for all the great things, all the beautiful things, those great things, beautiful things are going to build and get stronger. If you want more information, again, I have the the big link to all sorts of videos about this stuff. Brene is another one. If you're not familiar with her, her work is wonderful, I feel like. Here's some other organizations that specifically look at traumatic stress in childhood, trying to overcome mental illness, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. The book Trauma and Recovery is one of my favorites. I also mentioned Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk. Amazing work right there. So there's that. Before I'll take this link as well before we sort of go off of this. If you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback, here's a QR code, and I'll also put the link in chat, but I wanted to put that into the slideshow, and I am going to stop sharing and bring us back to thoughts, questions, comments, and conversation. We got plenty of time. I went through fast. So thank you for suffering through the blah, blah, blah and the quick stuff. What do you think? What comes up for people? And feel free, everyone, unmute. Let's, is this new information? Is this making sense? Did it resonate? What thoughts do you have? I see my beautiful friend Sandy Ellis right there. And she almost always has something awesome to say. Oh, but Jacqueline Janet has her hand up. To you first. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Hi, thank you. The first time attending, I always see the trauma trainings and I never can make it. But this specific one, for obvious or maybe not obvious reasons, hit me really hard. So I wanted to make sure that I was making it, and it's a lot of information. And I feel that, you know, for me, I'm not just a woman of color, but also like a woman in recovery, long-term recovery. And so I've been doing a lot of this work, and now my mother also is a woman in long-term recovery. So we're actually in the process, and these children are in recovery. you know, so I feel like when I was listening to everything, it's like, it's really resonating, but I think that also, like, it's like, where are if you're not recognizing it and you're not getting these accesses to this information, it's like, how do you navigate through that? And looking at, for me, it's like, I'm the first to do a lot of these things, starting to break down, and that can be tiring. Fortunately for me, my mother is started, she's recognizing, and so she's following along and then breaking it. So it's going backwards and forwards. So that's a nice, like, shift in what we know. You need to wait for a minute. But yeah, these so this is like, it's like, I think I was thinking, like, where are the more resources for the families that are trying together to look at this, and to, like, move forward in that space. Recently we just actually, like, joined, like, a church together. In order to kind of, it's like navigating through it. I think it's just like recognizing what that looks like, and it's like, but where are the spaces, for that specific, especially if resources aren't like the top of your list, right? So I don't know if that made sense, but this was great. Thank you.
So much of what you said made sense and was great. And so one of the videos that I have on my giant playlist is about being in recovery, and it speaks to this idea that we kind of been told, like, if you have a parent that's an addict, you're going to go one way or the other, and it's sort of, that's all there is. But there are really different outcomes if you're in recovery. if that person is in recovery, you're much likelier to like have, and like you're doing it. It sounded like from the little tiny bit that you said that you were the one in recovery first. And then that model went up a generation, and we kind of caught that you got some littles, and they're going to have such a different childhood than you had. I'm sure, just based on those couple different facts about what you grew up with, where you are now, their childhood is going to be very different. And you are doing it. You're already breaking. You're doing the work is breaking this generational curses are being broken because of the work you're doing. And sort of the world of AA and NA and all of that has so much in it there too, because that is collective healing. People in recovery usually have been successful because they've joined with other people that are also sort of sharing their same struggle. And many of the people on here today are, you know, sort of in my community of people that are working on their own family stuff, and we're working on it together. And working on it together is huge, is so helpful. It really does help you feel like it's not just me, I'm not alone. I can see. And one of the things, and Sandy always reminds me of it because she like called me on it, but we can't see our own stuff. Called me on it in the most loving way, but like, you can't see your own stuff. I'm a trauma therapist, but I did not see my own trauma. I can very easily see, like, as Jacqueline's telling me about addiction, I can make all kinds of guesses about her stuff. It's much easier to see other people's stuff than your own stuff. And that's why being together in groups, talking to friends, joining things like AA it's so much like, we need to do this with other people because you need that perspective, right? Of what other people can see. We just can't see our stuff in the way we can see other people's until we sort of put it out there and talk about it. And just like you said, the fact that you sort of came to this and here you are and you're talking about what you're going through, and you joined a church, you're doing this, like, you're doing the work right there. You're like our example of how to undo this stuff. So if you feel lost, bummer, because you are rocking this. You're doing this. You're showing us the way forward. And
Can I just say, Amy, Jacqueline has provided me, and I could just feel it with a glimmer. One of my triggers is that our society is we just don't have it in us to do this work and find our way to recover ourselves. And we can. And this is collective healing. And you gave me a glimmer today, Jacqueline. Susan and Amy gave me a glimmer with being able to, you know, to spend my lunch hour doing this with all of you for collective healing. And so, yeah, thank you for the glimmers.
A pleasure. Jump in. Anyone else? How is this? What thoughts come up? I know many people here, this is not your first time thinking about generational trauma and what kinds of things may have been handed down. We didn't even really talk about sort of adoption and the primal wound, sort of what happens when you are removed from the people that you're genetically related to. And the learning on generational trauma kind of can show us that even if you weren't raised with the people you're biologically related to, the stuff that happened to them impacts you, right? Like the whole field of epigenetics looks at that even at the genetic level, we don't get we're not starting fresh ever. Things that have happened are being passed along and impacting us. And I'm going to try to grab those links out of my PowerPoint and hope that somebody else wants to jump in and talk while I'm doing that.
I just wanted to say, Amy, thank you for, for inviting me to be part of this. I know when we talked, and I come from a field where we talk about trauma a lot in public health. And why I was most excited about this is because there is hope. So often we feel like whether it's for ourselves and our own trauma and depression and anxiety, boy, I can really relate personally to that slide where, you can say, I feel like I'm going to die. Well, here's some therapy, 2 to 3 months, you may feel better. Same with medication. But boy, there are some things that immediately make us feel better. And I'll add to that TikTok, things that distract us. And it's the opposite of mindfulness. It's the opposite of mindfulness. And for me, the beauty of mindfulness is being able to calm my mind. And, for people will often say to me, oh, I can't meditate, or I can't still my mind. And what I would say is no one can, no one can. The whole idea is just to practice it. It's just to get those moments of peace in your mind. And over time, it gives you an opportunity to access that peacefulness. And so, yeah, the hopefulness of psychedelics, which is so promising. And I mean, let's face it, I mean, I think we're largely a room full of helpers. A lot of the things we're doing are just not cutting it. We need to, use every tool in the toolbox. And if there's something new, we want to pull that in too. So, yeah, thank you for offering, hope that whether it's, us individually suffering, our community suffering, our loved ones or our patients, that there is hope to feel better, to feel joy, to feel peace. And yeah, so I just wanted to say I'm so glad to be talking about this in terms of understanding where it's coming from. I think it's very important to understand. And I loved what you said about the pull to not change. Oh my goodness, I have a big family. I have a big family. If I suggest we change something, even if it's something we all agree is terrible, the push, no, but this is how we've always done it, and this is how we work as a family. So that pull to not change, it's just, hardwired in us from our family systems. So I just want to say thank you. Thanks for everyone that showed up and is part of this as well.
There's so much good stuff that you just said, Susan. Thank you. One of the things I recognized sort of in this work was that I wasn't like that. I've been trying to not be mindful, right? Like when you have a childhood abuse, you're sort of sending your mind somewhere else. You're staying as far away from the actual present moment as possible, right? And so I kind of was like, why is this mindfulness stuff so hard for me and just doesn't seem right? And I realized like I've been trying to do that. I've been teaching myself the opposite for a real long time. But also that piece of like the glimmer, like we get what we pay attention to. So when we are learning to use our mind and focus on what we want to focus on, that is good. That's healing, focusing on the joy, on the good. And in trauma, you don't feel like you get to choose what you're focusing on. It feels overwhelming and stuck. And that sort of idea that we can, that Heartwell can be this place that helps people access mindfulness practices that haven't traditionally mindfulness is often really seen as something very white, very affluent, very academic, very intellectual, and like it can be all those things, but it can be so much more, and we all need it. It can't just be for those people. It's got to be for all of us.
Well,
So it's exciting that Heartwell is taking that charge on.
thank you, Amy. And I just want to say, and this won't surprise a lot of you, but mindfulness, you know, for a certain group of white affluent medical professionals, there's almost this idea that they invented mindfulness. Well, mindfulness has been around for a really long time, and it's been helping people and been raised up as a practice. You quoted Thich Nhat Hanh. This is a practice of the East. It's been around for thousands of years. And here in the West, we've medicalized it, of course. But there is science behind it, and there are many different ways to practice it. People will say, I don't practice mindfulness, but I knit. Well, if you knit, you're practicing mindfulness because you're stilling your mind and you're doing something that is calming your mind. And the science is there, but again, these are practices that have been kind of adopted by the Western white culture, but these existed and have been used all around the world for thousands of years. And although I have to say, so here at Heartwell, we really want to make mindfulness available to everyone. And like you said, Amy, I've been to mindfulness retreats, and it's usually a lot of women who look like me, and I'm really excited about the idea of being able to make it available to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts, comments? Anybody want to say?
Oh,
Go ahead.
can I?
Jen.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
of
don't.
course. We're loving you. We're loving your comments. Don't think twice. Thank you.
I wanted to talk to Suzanne though, because I am a wellness coach, and I teach yoga, meditation, and sound healing, and I do it in recovery spaces, BIPOC spaces. So even if I can get your information, maybe we can connect in that capacity, because that's exactly what I do for work.
Oh, that is such a good score for all of us. Thank you. I know Susan will be following up, and we'll definitely want some of, wow, that sounds great. Anyone else that have any, I know it's kind of a lot of information, and I went really fast, and it's kind of heavy, and some people were ready to respond, and I know that's not everybody, but I also know lots of people here today have been engaged in this work, have been doing this, are people that do already kind of care about this stuff. So if you have any thoughts or insights you'd be willing to share, we'd love it. Go, Susan.
Hi, Amy. I just wanted to say that I thought it was really full of great information, and I thought it was well paced. I know you were worried about it, but it was really well done. So congratulations.
I love you. Have I told you lately? I haven't told you lately because I haven't seen you, but here you are. I get to tell you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So sweet. Sorry, I see your hand up. Yay.
Yeah, although we just saw each other a couple of weeks ago at the retreat, which was really helpful. And I was a late discovery adoptee, and I was so busy with life and 4 kids and stuff. So I never really addressed any of the issues until maybe last year after the first retreat. And so after that retreat, the click went to the mindfulness therapy using art, and I was an art major, and it really bothers me that I never even had the time to do it. It's like, duh, So, I've been doing that a lot now, and, the ones, sometimes when you're looking at a blank page, there's like, it's, overwhelming. You know, you're like, where do I begin? And you're afraid to do something. So instead, I started doing these things with the, when your printer goes crazy and it vomits out crap that looks like gobbledygook. It looks like this. I don't know
We
if you
can't
can
see it.
but it always does this. Well, anyway, it just looks like symbols and stuff, and you can't read it, whatever. And I was going to throw it out, but it was pages and pages of ink and paper, and trees died for it. So I thought, let me do something with it. So the fact that you're starting from this stuff and you have to really study it to decipher what it could be and what you can create from it was like a great starting point.
Mm.
So I'm finding that very helpful, and anybody can do it. I mean, if you look at my Facebook page, it's like every day I usually post one or two. But I find that it's something you wouldn't think to do, but you're saving a tree, you're using your ink, and it just, and some of the things that pop out of it, like make me laugh. It's just really funny, but so start it. It's like and it doesn't take much time. All you need is a pen and some crayons or something.
And there's a
But
good research base behind that. That's another Brene thing. She talks a lot about creativity as a way to sort of work through the stuff and kind
Yeah.
of take it outside of yourself and put it into something, create something.
yeah, but the thing about it is that you really have to concentrate on it. So it blocks out all the other stuff.
Mm,
and it gets you out of that. But the stuff that does come out in the art is like really wild.
yeah,
So
right.
I find it
It works
helpful.
on multiple levels.
Yeah.
The doing, the end result, all of that. Anna, great to hear from you. Oh, you're muted. You're on the mute.
I pushed the wrong button. I meant to start the video too, because I wanted, if I was going to speak, I want to be on camera.
Thank you.
So it was what stood out for me today. Just through life, adding pieces together. When I was younger, like before I was 18, I always thought my purpose in life was to have kids, right? And then as I this was like the early 80s, I was like, oh, I don't have to do that if I don't want to do that. And in my 20s, I was like, I'm not going to have kids. And then one of the reinforcements of that was I saw how messed up my mom was. And I recognized what I got from her, that I didn't want to pass that on to a kid. And now being almost 60 and not ever having kids, I feel justified in that decision now that I know more about, things that are genetically passed on. That it wasn't just exposure, it was also genetic, right? Depression and that kind of thing. And so today it just reinforced, knowing that I feel justified in my decision. Especially with yesterday being Mother's Day, and it was like,
Right?
and kind of the damaged relationship that I felt like I had with my mom. Yesterday was just a rehashing every time I saw somebody's Mother's Day post, right? And so my self-care was like, scroll faster. Like there's got to be more Aurora pictures out there for me to look at instead of like,
Oh.
focusing on that, the pain, because my mom's passed, and so there's no fixing the things that we had, you know. So another thing that came up today that I thought was interesting was the prejudice, you know, and the victimization of that, and how I grew up with stories of my mom being victimized when she lived in another town, and not understanding why I didn't want to connect with people from that town, because we are a different nationality and they were the nationality that were the abusers. And now recognizing that's probably one of the obstacles that's there is because of my mom's trauma.
Yeah, that's a good.
Kind of vague without. I'll be at the meeting on Wednesday and maybe be able to share more, but
Yeah, but I think that's exactly like we do recognize kind of far after the fact what really was under. That's exactly the unpacking that we're talking about, is like when you have an experience or something that you're not quite sure what's going on, and then you can drill down and realize like, oh yeah, your mom set that one up for you because she had real strong feelings about this group of people and that group of people, and you can see it modeled, but you also, like, we can't help but be pulled into that, right? And the whole thing you talked about making the choice to not have children definitely stops the generational cycle. But like, because of the generational cycle, you almost didn't really get a freely like, you didn't get to make your own choices. Your choices were very much influenced by the things you experienced.
I mean, yeah, it just
That's
felt like it
generational
would
trauma.
be so selfish to just have a kid for the sake of having a kid and then go, oh God, I like messed it. Like it just never stops. And it was just like, well, the buck stops here, you know, kind of choice that I made. I mean, at the time, you know, you make the choices in your life with your current circumstances. And that seemed to be the best choice at the time. You know, it's like I like other people's kids, but
Yeah, and that's not to say that, you know, people, yeah, we can undo some of the harm, but it is on us. And once you become a parent, like you do have to pour into your kids, and if you haven't already done your own work, yeah, I definitely can see the ways that my trauma content has been put on my kid. He's, you know, trying to unpack it and trying to recognize what's his and what's mine, but it's
yeah,
hard.
because the work didn't start until I was in my 30s. So, you know, making that choice early on was the best, you know, the best I could do with the tools that I had. Right.
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know. That's so much what this is all about. All of this stuff is like hidden and not seen. We didn't even realize. Like, it really is the last decade that we now know this stuff. It's real. You're impacted, even when it didn't happen to you. That's not our imagination. It's impactful and it's powerful. I can see that it's already past 2. So if people have to go, that's fine. Thank you all so much for being here. It looks like there's some really great comments there. And I will send the recording to Susan, and hopefully they'll be able to put it on the Heartwell page, and maybe also with the playlist reference, because there's so much. If you are interested in the topic, there's lots that you can find out about it. That playlist is probably like 30 hours long of stuff. And that's just, you know, that was quick, easy to find things. There's so much learning we can do on this. And we also get to look forward to the Heartwell Institute and all the great things that they will hopefully be offering going forward. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you all
everyone.
so much. Great to see you. I'll see some of you again sometime soon. And So appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you all.